All right, if you want to take it away.
Take it away. Thank you, Brandy. I appreciate the invite to come back and speak. And today we're going to talk about a little bit different items than maybe we've talked about previously. Let me see if I can share my screen. And we'll go from there. All right.
And we can see it in, I guess, yep, you're putting it right now. Perfect.
Perfect. Good. So today we're going to talk a little bit more on the actual test itself and leveraging what you're currently doing in your classrooms to assist the students that are going to be taking the HiSET exam. So let me do a little preview of what we're going to do here. One moment. So 5 things today, if we can keep it within the hour, because there's a lot of things to kind of go through and talk about. But we're going to look at why considering the HiSET, a quick look at the Minnesota HiSET program. We're going to look at each subtest, talk about practice tests, and then talk about accommodations if we do have time to do that. So the HiSET exam, the first part of this is going to be a little bit of a refresher, but I like to do it quickly just to make sure if you've not been on one of our calls that you do have a little bit of a background of the HiSET. So choosing the HiSET does have some great benefits for your students. It is flexible, so students can take it anywhere. It is multiple choice only. So there are a lot of students that struggle with technology, with doing all the different things that it takes to do some of the other high school equivalency tests. So just having a familiar test question, such as multiple choice, does help alleviate some of that anxiety. And then, of course, we do have one essay. We do have a very high pass rate of almost 82%, which is wonderful. We are affordable, and of course, Minnesota does provide some codes there for students to take that test for free, as long as their funding holds out, so that is even better. We do offer free test prep. You'll see some of that as we go through the session. We are connected with adult educators across the state, so we have great input. We get great information from people doing different things across the states, and we're able to share that within our presentations. And then, of course, we have alternative formats so students can take the test 3 times in any given calendar year. We do have 3 options. Different states can pick and choose different ones. So we do offer paper-based, computer-based, and computer-based online proctored, which can be done at home or at your site if there is a place for a student to have a quiet, uninterrupted space. The online proctored is available 24 hours a day, which is awesome. So if you have late nighters that works better for them, or early morning students and works better for them, this can really meet them where they're at. And you have to be very careful with the IDs. The only difference is the military ID is not an acceptable form of ID when taking the online proctored. A little bit different for paper-based testing in Minnesota. So it's kind of an individual basis, unless the student does have disability accommodations approved. Possibly other issues that might lean towards paper-based testing could be that you're in a corrections facility. Maybe there's a religious accommodations that you need to have. Maybe there's internet issues where you're at. You're in a rural setting and there just isn't internet. Any of those situations are looked at on a case-by-case basis by MDE, and also that would be Brandy. So make sure that you are in touch with her when looking at having that paper-based test available for your students. So a quick overview on eligibility requirements for Minnesota. If the person is 19 and they're not enrolled in high school, of course, they can take it without any age waiver attached. 17 and 18-year-olds must apply for that age waiver, and you can see that here is the form for the Minnesota Department of Adult Ed, and they can find that form there. They will need a valid government issued ID also to the testing site. As far as residency, you do not have to be a resident of Minnesota in order to qualify to take the test. And it looks like we are stuck here for a moment. There we go. Test preparation. Certain states have students, enroll in adult ed. Certain states may have students do the practice test, but Minnesota does not require a student to do test prep or enroll in an adult ed program, although it is highly, highly encouraged that students are a part of an adult ed program just so they get the help that they need as they're going through their course of study. We do have study guides, of course, online. You can find them at Amazon or with our partners such as Essential Ed or Aztec or some other ones that are out there. We do have practice tests, and we do have a brand new practice test, half length. This is the free one. We just put it out online about 3 weeks ago, so that is readily available for you to download and have students practice in that. Towards the end of summer, we are going to have a full-length paid practice test and a full-length official practice test. So we are very excited for that. That came directly from the field requesting full length, and so we will have that available to you towards the end of summer, probably late July, August. So look for that to come out as well. For ID, a student can use expired or non-expired IDs, whether it's their passport, their driver's license, a state issued ID card, whatever it is, it does need to have a picture of the student on that card. So just remember the military ID, though, is not acceptable if they're doing that at-home online proctor test. So a quick look at options and fees as we zip through here. Paper-based testing is $28 in total, and you can see the fee breakdown of $18 is the HiSET fee, and $10 is the test center fee where the student is taking that exam. If a student were to take all 5 exams and not have to retest, they would be paying $140 out of pocket or with the help of the Minnesota code. Computer testing is $23.75. You can see the breakdown there. Test center fee is going to be $10. Test fee right now is $13.75. And the test at home is going to be a little more pricey just because that is a live proctor. And that is somebody that is going to be watching that test taker for the entirety of their exam. So you can see that's a little bit more expensive, but it's a great option, especially if you're in a rural area or a student really wants to just come in and take it in your office and they don't have the ability to do that at home. It can be a really great option for some students. The Minnesota test code, there is a discount code here, and you can see the code is MNHSC free when the student does schedule and pay for those HiSET subtests. And you can see that the person is looking for help to pay their testing fee. They have to have a Minnesota address, so that's a little bit different. And they have to be approved testing center site or are doing the at-home online proctor. With our retakes, HiSET gives each student 2 free retakes for every test that they purchase. So this does not help with the free retakes because that student is still responsible for the test center fee. So while the actual exam fee is waived for 2 times, the test center fee still has to be paid. So the Minnesota code does not take care of that part of it. So the student would be responsible for that. So that is for our Minnesota test code. Policies that you might want to remember when your students are getting close to that test day is to remind them that if they are a no-show, no call, no show, that it will take away that test. So they will forfeit any fee that they paid, or if it's a free retake, they will forfeit that free retake. If the student can at least call 24 hours in advance, they can reschedule that test with no problem. But if you do have a student that has an emergency, they didn't show, maybe they had a car accident, or we know all kinds of things can happen, you can contact your regional state rep and they can get that absence excused if it is an excusable absence. So please definitely make sure to talk to your students when they don't show up for a test. A quick thing on HiSET scoring, it is a 20-point scale. So a student must get 8 out of 20 on each of the 5 subtests. With the writing portion, that means the writing multiple choice and the essay must equal 8 in any form, but the minimum essay is 2. So a student could get a 2 on the essay and a 6 on the writing multiple choice and get that 8, or a student could have a great writing day and get a 4, and then they could have a 4 on the multiple choice. They would still have that 8 in order to pass. So it is a combination of those 2 scores to make that 8. So the most important thing to remind students is that even though they could pass every subtest with an 8, it is not enough to be able to pass the entire certification test, because they have to have a total score of at least 45. So a student maybe does the 8 on tests that they're not as comfortable with, but maybe on social studies or science, they can do much better and they get a 12 or a 13 to make up for those points. So students have a tendency to go in and look at their score report and it says pass next to each subtest, but don't realize that they have to have that 45 in order to pass the entire exam and get their credentials. So I would definitely be mindful to remind students of that as well as they're going through their testing process. And here's just some samples of the scoring guides that we have out there and the score reports. So now to the meat of our day today. I just wanted to do a very quick overview of the test itself. And now I'd like to actually look at each subtest kind of individually and talk about what you're doing in your classroom for this test or any high school equivalency exam. So there are 2 high school equivalency exams. I'm sure you're familiar with GED and HiSET. But what a lot of educators do in their classroom is they kind of preferentially put a student towards one or the other. I would like to have an open mind going in and just talk about the fact that both of these tests are really normed to the same content, the same standards. So they all come from CCR standards that are put out by OCTAE, which is the Office of Career Tech. So both tests are going to be focused on the same content and the same standards. So if you're teaching a GED class, you're really teaching a HiSET class. If you're teaching a HiSET class, you're really teaching a GED class. So the content is going to be the same and the standards are going to be the same. The big differences are the breakdown on how many subtests, the type of questions, the format that things are actually asked in, and things like that, pricing and accommodations, and just those things that make up the actual test itself as far as modalities and all those things. So think about that when you're in your classroom and give students that option. You know, what works best for them to get through to the next point. So let's look at these subtests in totality. And we're gonna start with reading and then go down the line with writing, math, science, and social studies. So looking at the language arts reading, which is one of 2 language arts, we actually break that subtests down into two, the reading portion and the writing portion. So with the reading portion of subtest 1, there are 50 questions, and you are allotted 65 minutes for the English and 80 minutes for the Spanish. Reading only. It's the only time where there is a difference in the amount of time given to the reading for English and Spanish. So with this, there are two basic content categories, one being literary text, the second being informational type text. And we're going to look at that here in just a minute, a little more in depth. The process categories are comprehension, inference and interpretation, analysis and synthesis and generalization. And when we're looking at the comprehensive part of this, we are going to look at someone demonstrating that they can understand details. This can start with very minimal details and just increase as they are going through their studies. They're increasing their reading fluency. They're increasing their ability to comprehend. They're reading passages. This is a great thing with that, is just being able to pick out details, starting small and working up to at some larger ones. Determining the meaning of words and phrases as they're used in the text. So being able to pick out a vocabulary word, but maybe they don't understand it, but they can look around the sentence before and after and reasonably figure out what that word means. They're going to be able to analyze specific word choices, learn about meaning and tone. You know, what is the author thinking when he's writing with his meaning? The next one is the inference and interpretation. So the student is going to need to know how to make and support inferences from the text, whatever text they're given. So looking at different types of text when you're teaching, whether it's poetry or biographies or short stories, just all types of different text, so the student gets used to being able to draw an inference from that and support it. The student should be able to draw conclusions or understand meaning that maybe aren't completely spelled out in the text. So being able to just think about maybe what the author is meaning or what's going to happen next as they are reading different text. The student should be also able to infer traits, feelings, and motives of different characters and individuals. A great way to accomplish that is working through plays and short stories and things like that, as they learn about characters and feelings of characters. And just be able to look beyond the script and think about what could happen next or what maybe happened first. Another one for inference and interpretation is understanding the different formats that could be presented in. So whether it's a chart or a graph or a table. And you can see that this definitely goes across all of the categories, whether it's reading, whether it's social studies, or it's science. Students need to be able to understand the information as it's presented in a graph or a table and read what they need to find in that format. And then, of course, interpreting non-literal language, so symbolism, different things like that, sometimes is a little more difficult as they're working through their reading and their comprehension, is to be able to interpret that non-literal language. The last two are analysis, which is going in and understanding the main topic, the theme, summarizing key details. These can be, very, very simple one paragraph text to actual essays that they are learning how to pick out main ideas and topics, determining what the author or speaker's viewpoint is, being able to compare and contrast or different timelines. Possibly recognizing the author's style or structure. The flashbacks, the irony, things that have happened or things that can happen. The last one is going to be synthesis and generalization. So the student needs to be able to draw conclusions, make generalizations based on text, make predictions, based on evidence. And again, this is going to flow across the science and the social studies as they're looking at these things. The student needs to be able to compare and contrast elements of maybe a couple different passages. So maybe there's two different points of view and the student needs to be able to compare those or talk about those. And then,
Hey, Tess, just a heads up, you're freezing a little bit. Maybe you want to turn off your video just to help with the bandwidth.
yeah, I can do that. Let's see if that helps. All right, let me know if there's any other issues. Thanks, Brandy.
Thank you.
Yeah, I see that my screen's liking to freeze on me here. So with each of these subtests, we're going to take a quick look at the depths of knowledge that are required. So when you are giving the practice test and looking in the back of the practice test, you'll notice that each question is rated easy, medium, and difficult. So that way it's easy to kind of compare the depths of knowledge with the way that a question is rated. So I would definitely make sure that you're looking at the different practice tests and how the different questions are rated, and then kind of look at the depths of knowledge as well. So with the reading test, level 1 is specifically recall. So very surface level, recalling some details, maybe thinking about a main point or things like that. Level 2 is going to be your skill concept area where a student can actually think about the text and process it and make some inferences to a little bit subsurface level. So maybe they're analyzing a little bit about what the speaker might be thinking, as they're going through. Level 3 of the depth of knowledge is strategic thinking. So this test taker is going to be able to analyze that text, make more meaning than what is there and be able to kind of see beyond. And then as they get into level 4, that's extended thinking. The test taker is going to be able to do some higher order thinking through reasoning. So these are great things to be able to have discussions or Lexile level text where students can all participate in discussions and things and work through all 4 of these levels as they're recalling, some of those things and then some reasoning or, why things happen the way they happen in a text or a story. So with each of these, I've kind of just put in the top 10 classroom skills that a student might need to have to pass the HiSET exam. And I will be sending out this PowerPoint, so you'll have these available. But a student needs to be able to identify key information and themes, use context clues, be able to assess arguments, think about biases and drawing conclusions. It's great to have stories with no endings so a student can learn to think through, well, what could logically happen at the end of that story? Be able to use information from text to make guesses or predictions. Again, same thing. Open-ended endings are great for students. Being able to summarize a paragraph to someone else is really easy for a student when they start off with very short stories and they just have to summarize this in a sentence or two. Really helps with learning that main point or the main concept. A student needs to be able to compare different viewpoints. This is great for when we get into writing and the student is going to really need to be able to produce information for that argumentative essay. So they need to be able to see viewpoints, talk about why maybe they agree or disagree with the viewpoint, but that'll be very useful when coming to the writing portion. A student should also be able to identify how information is organized. So using graphic organizers and different things and bullet points and being able to just talk through how maybe a passage is put together. They should also be able to draw connections from prior knowledge and what they're reading. So they can kind of take what they've read and apply it to a real life situation or maybe compare it to something that has happened in their past. And then the last one I have for our top 10 is using strategies like annotating or highlighting or just taking notes different ways for different students to just be able to retain their information. Any questions on reading? All right, we're going to hop over to writing. Writing is 61 questions. That is 60 multiple choice and 1 argumentative or opinion essay. They are the same. Some people call them different, but it is opinionated or argumentative essay. And as we look at the 3 sections of writing, we are looking at organization of ideas, language facility, and writing conventions. The essay question itself is looking for a central position, so the student needs to be able to take a side. They need to be able to organize their ideas, have their language facility, and their writing convention. So those are the things we're looking at there. So with the writing process categories, organization of ideas, we're looking at selecting logical openings, closing sentences, things like that. A lot of people will teach the 5-paragraph essay, whereas, an open paragraph, an ending paragraph, and 3 middles. That is very effective, but it does not have to be 5 paragraphs as long as the student is able to give an opening and a closing and just give their information. Be able to evaluate relevance of content, be able to analyze and evaluate the structure of a text. This is really important when writing that essay. Being able to transition using words like however, likewise, things like that are very helpful in knowing that vocabulary and what it's used for when writing. With the language facility, looking at recognizing appropriate use of phrases and clauses, recognizing effective and very compound complex sentences. So, working up through just the easy verb noun all the way through the compound complex. Looking at idiomatic usages, like things that don't always make sense depending on where you're from. Cut corners or miss the boat or different things like that. Being able to express their ideas. A main one for people that have not passed the essay is going off topic. So a student needs to be able to express their ideas, understand what's asked of them, and be able to maintain the appropriate style and tone of their writing. So just be wary of that when students come back and they said, oh, I wrote 5 paragraphs and that's what you told me to do, most likely it's because the student has gone off topic. So very important to have the student understand what an argumentative essay is, how to pull out a point or two from the text that they've read, and also be able to pull in information from their own life and write about that in a couple sentences. And that will really help them get through that writing essay. And the last one here in language facility is to analyze nuances and the meanings of words. So different things that might be the same: stare, glare, scowl. So again, it's vocabulary. And then the writing conventions portion is just understanding your basic grammar, form of verbs, pronouns, things like that, grammatical agreement. We're looking at being able to recognize and correct incomplete sentences. So not writing an entire paragraph that's one sentence, just being able to understand that that's really not what we're looking for, that they really need to be able to recognize sentence fragments and run-ons. The fourth one is recognizing just your basic grammar, capitalization, punctuation, commas, things like that, and spelling. And then using reference sources, so dictionaries, thesaurus, and glossaries. So that's also an important part of writing conventions. So with the writing depth of knowledge, again, we have 4 levels. They are recall, so looking at spelling, commonly misspelled words, looking at skill and concept for level 2, so looking at doing some very basic editing by finding grammar, punctuation, capitalization mistakes, editing someone else's paper, just doing things so that they get very familiar with finding things that can be done a different way. Level 3, you're getting into that strategic thinking again. So analyzing drafts, making more revisions, not just on grammar, but now getting into like the organization, the paragraphing, the tone, looking at verb agreement, things like that. And then your level 4 is going to be extended thinking. So test takers are using complex reasoning to make drafts. So this would probably take place on your final argumentative 5-paragraph draft. Whereas your level 1, they might be really just looking at a single paragraph that we're going to look for maybe misspelled words or um, having capitalization issues or things like that. So you can see that there's a wide difference in skill level from 1 to 4 with the writing. And my top 10 writing classroom skills. So structuring writing with paragraphs, key points, and conclusions, reviewing basic grammar. So keeping that verb tense consistent, practicing the correct sentencing with your grammar, and again, your subject verb agreement. Number 3 would be expanding vocabulary. So every day is a new vocabulary word. Using your vocabulary to enhance their writing. So those are great things you can do when a student comes in, here's the vocabulary and tell me how you're going to use it in your sentences or your writing today. Number 4 would be developing ideas with specific details or anecdotes. So learning how to pull in their own prior knowledge, things that they have gone through or have happened to them, being able to illustrate that in their writing. The 5th one would be using transitional words like therefore, however, furthermore, just to connect their ideas and create some coherence in their writing so they're not doing those long run-on sentences. And the next one is tailoring their writing, their style to suit the audience. So are they using some formal language or informal language, things like that? And then engaging with the topic by looking at somebody else's perspective. And these can be really great things to do in the classroom as well, by writing essays in different perspectives and sharing them and just having some great discussion. The next one would be allocating time to just revise and edit work. So making time in the class to do that as a group, and do that with other people's work as well. It gives them a different way to look at how other people write, especially done anonymously. And then familiarizing themselves with essay structure. So, looking at that 5-paragraph essay or looking at a paragraph and how to do conclusion sentences and intro sentences. And then last is practicing planning and drafting. So using a lot of those things in the classroom where they are able to bullet point their thoughts or maybe use graphic organizers to think about where they want to go with their story. So those would be my top 10 writing classroom skills for you today. And next, we're going to look at the mathematics portion, which is 90 minutes, 55 questions, and again, all multiple choice. And those content categories are going to be 19% are number and operations, 18% or thereabout is going to be measurement geometry, 18% again is going to be data analysis with some probability, some statistics types of problems. And then you can see the majority of this is going to be 45% the algebra side. So from beginning to mid algebra is going to be a place that I would definitely hit in the classroom. So the process categories are looking at concepts and procedures, analyzing, interpreting, and then synthesizing data and solving problems. So there are a lot of process categories here. So we're going to go through them rather quickly so we can make sure to hit each section. But just using real numbers, rational numbers, looking at number lines, things like that. Number 2, rewriting expressions. Number 3 is solving problems. So definitely make sure you're doing word problems with all of that math vocabulary that's involved so that they know when they go in, they can at least understand the vocabulary because that makes a big difference when there's word problems. Number 4 is to be able to reason quantitatively and use units to solve problems. Number 5, choosing appropriate limitations on measurements. So, getting out the measurements, whether it's for partially for geometry, measuring carpets, or, actually measuring on a measure or on a ruler, different things like that, just to get them familiar with the vocabulary of measurement and the different types of measurement. Number 6 is doing some real world problems out there. So again, looking at money or budgeting, percentages, sales, all those different things that a student might use in their daily life. The second one is going to be measurement in geometry. So you're looking at understanding like planes, two-dimensional figures, things like that, using properties of 2D figures and the formulas. And you'll see the formula sheet come up here shortly. The third one is understanding and applying the Pythagorean theorem. So like distance between 2 points on a grid, finding the third part of the triangle, things like that. Number 4 is going to be demonstrating that 2 triangles can be similar. So another one that students will need to be able to do. Number 5 is using volume formulas, maybe cylinders, cones, spheres, things like that that are more on the 3D side. Number 6 is going to be applying concepts. So, how many per square mile, how many BTUs per cubic foot, things like that, again, on that 3D type of surface. Number 7 is going to be solving problems with different angles. So, can they measure angles? Do they know, the type of angles that make a line, different things that have to do with degrees and things that they're going to work with and angles. And number 8, just having geometric terms. So they need to know that vocabulary. Vocabulary, if you stress the vocabulary, sometimes they can figure out a problem, even if they don't really remember how to do it, just by knowing the vocabulary in those word problems can really be helpful. And then the third one is your data analysis. So again, you can see it's across the subtest. Again, we're looking at graphing, understanding tables, interpreting data on different types of graphs. So this is really important across all of the 5 subtests, not as much on writing, but definitely on the other 4. Being able to identify a line from a plot. So again, you're looking at X and Y axes. Number 3, being able to use tables. Again, there's those the data displays. Number 4 is probability. So these are great things to do with M&Ms and fun stuff you can do in the classroom to help students understand what probability is and how they can predict chance, or can they. Number 5 is using measures of the center, so using the mean, using median, mode, those types of things, and then understanding statistics itself and how it's used and what it's used for, so predicting those sample outcomes of things. And then the last and hardest hit would be your algebraic concepts. So they need to know what factors are, what are coefficients, what are polynomials. So again, it's just really hitting hard the vocabulary. And then if the student is able to look at real life problems, they really will be able to use that and figure out the algebra in a much more meaningful fashion. So vocabulary and definitely those world life problems. So the student's going to need to be able to perform the operations, write expressions. They're going to, again, be able to do the real world problems with linear equations and inequalities. So again, they need to know what is a coefficient, what is an inequality, why are there letters in my math, things like that. Really just help kind of hit home what they're doing. And then solving simple rational equations, Also linear equations, when there's a 0, a 1, or an infinite number of solutions. And then graphing linear, quadratic, square root, and other types of functions. So very important in math to hit the vocabulary. And then the last part of the algebra is being able to rearrange formulas, understanding the functions, understanding the range of functions. Again, if you give them real world settings, it really does help with just remembering what they're doing when they get on that test, because they can go back and say, oh yeah, I remember if I did this, this happened to me, and I can kind of remember what I'm doing with the math portion. Number 13, explaining each step very simply. So if they can break down the math in very simple steps with the vocabulary that they've learned, it's going to be an easier process for them as they go into the math exam. And then the last one here is to calculate and interpret the average rate of change of a function. So like symbols on a table, change in a graph, different things. So using, again, that X and Y function. So there are, again, 4 levels of our depth of knowledge. The easiest level 1 is going to be the recall, where test takers really only need one-step calculations, very simple formulas, maybe that A plus B equals C. With your level 2, they're going to be able to do more than one calculation, could be a 2-step process. Level 3, they're going to have to make some inferences from their calculations. This is where it gets a little more difficult for most students. And then that extended thinking level 4, they're going to actually have to be able to think through problems in kind of a higher order in order to be able to come up with the answers that the test is looking for. So my top 10 for math are practicing basic operations. So the better that they are with just adding, subtracting, multiplying, knowing these things in their head really does help with more complex problems down the road. So the more the student knows, quick multiplication, it's one less thing they have to think about as they're going through a multi-stage problem. So I would definitely just hit that basic arithmetic, basic math operations. Number 2, develop some problem-solving strategies, starting with the easiest ones first. Again, a vocabulary, thinking about maybe some simple math scenarios that the student's already gone through that day, getting a sale, having to think of a percentage, things like that. The third one is just conversion. So thinking about inches to feet, grams to kilograms, that's really going to help solve a lot of the word problems that might have length, volume, weight, things like that. Identifying and calculating angles. So they need to be very up on what angles are, how to measure them, what perimeter and area are, what the difference in looking at a volume type of situation, like a 3D where you're looking at like cylindrical, or maybe you're looking at something other than just a 2D type of problem. The next one would be extracting information again on that data display. So bar graphs, pie charts, and being able to talk about what they mean. So very important, again, because it's across most of the subtests. The next one is simplifying expressions, looking at linear equations, just some basic algebra concepts, being able to calculate interest, talk about budgets, and how to solve problems related to expenses, taxes, savings, buying a house, all those fun things a student's going to encounter. They can use these math skills to really help them understand. And then using estimation to make quick calculations. This really helps on testing. So if there's a couple of answers and they can quickly calculate in their head what they think the answer could be, it's going to be able to help them to maybe cross off 2 of the answers and have 2 left, and give themselves a better chance to be able to get that conclusion. And also developing some reasoning skills. So looking at a pattern, making predictions, thinking about what would come next. And then the last one here is familiarizing yourself with just the basic calculator functions. So when doing the HiSET, the student is just going to be using a basic calculator. And so they don't really need to know all of the TI 30 information. And so that does take away some of the anxiety as well. So with the formula sheet, you'll notice on the formula sheet, there are 3 things that are not included. Those are distance, the Pythagorean theorem, and the quadratic formula. So these are things that I definitely would make sure that your students are aware of and are able to use, because the fact that they're not on the formula sheet might give us some thought that they would be on the test. And then the formula sheet itself is going to look at your 2D and your 4D types of problems. So your rectangle is circle circumference, area, volume, things like that. So that will be provided to the student, whether on screen or in paper, just depending on how the student is taking that exam. And the last two, we have science is a 60-minute question, 80 minutes for 60 questions. And we're looking at life science, physical science, and earth science. So let's look at those a little bit here. So with the life science, the students are going to need to understand what organisms are, their environments, looking at biology, a life cycle, maybe looking at the interdependence of organisms, how they interact with each other. So looking at the whole chart with the predators and different things and how things work together. Very important there with the biology part. And then recognizing the relationship between structure and function in living systems. And looking at the human body. So what is the role of DNA? You know, what are chromosomes? Again, it's hitting the vocabulary. So the more vocabulary a student can understand, the better off that they will do well on the exam. So let's look at physical science. So in the physical science, again, you're pulling in some of that math with understanding volume, mass, color, temperature. So things that you might use in a science experiment, things that might be like with the earth and different physical science properties. So again, it's going to kind of cross with the math concept, being able to understand position and motion. So a little bit of physics is kind of applied here. The principles of light, heat, electricity, and magnetism. So understanding that, you know, there's electrical charges, there's magnetic forces, all of those properties in the physical science area. And then, you know, what is matter? What are atoms? What is the structure there of energy? And then the last one is understanding chemical reactions. So it's a great time to get out those experiments and talk about, you know, science and do some fun things in the class that really hit home the vocabulary, and then just some of the principles that happen around energy and chemical reactions and such. And then the last is your earth science. So again, they're looking at materials that make up their earth, geology, time, looking at earthquakes and things around that are happening, talking about natural occurrences in the world with storms and tornadoes and all of these different things, and how, you know, what they're caused by, and predictions, things like that. And then the third is understanding movements and the Earth's position in the solar system, and then understanding the sun, stars, and other things where they can interpret data and talk about the life cycle of a star, or you know, just anything out in the galaxy. So, and again, it's hitting home that vocabulary that a student can use as they're going through the science. The depth of knowledge for recall is just, again, vocabulary. Maybe some quick facts on or properties within those 3 science areas. As they get through level 2, they're looking at the skill and concept of just interpreting data. So again, looking at charts, looking at graphs, looking at pictorial data and talking about, how things work and integrate together, things like that. With their strategic thinking, the level 3, the test taker is going to be able to make some inference, draw a conclusion by looking at some data. So doing science projects and kind of asking the student, what do you think is going to happen? And then really looking at what does happen. So it's a great place to start doing some inference. And then as they get into level 4, their extended thinking, the test taker is going to be doing a lot more higher order. So maybe they're looking at doing some basic chemistry and looking at the composition of different chemicals and things, just some higher orders thinking as they work through the science. And then my top 10 for science are being able to, again, charts and graphs. You can see this is our favorite, analyzing that data, reading scientific text, because sometimes scientific text can be very difficult to understand. But again, if that student knows that vocabulary, they'll be able to extract that information and talk about what they have read. Applying scientific inquiry, so doing those experiments, talking about what's going to happen before, and then interpreting what really happens after. And again, the next one will be practicing data sets. So how do you set up a science experiment? What is the data that you're going to put into that experiment, and how is it going to interact? The next one would be understanding those key scientific topics, looking at biology, looking at chemistry and physics, earth science, astronomy, all those different things. Doing readings in each to interconnect with their reading and drawing those conclusions in both of those subtests is really a great way to introduce some of these scientific topics. Using principles and reasoning for scenarios that you may come up with, or some real world problems that maybe a student is really interested in. The next one would be understanding graphical representations, how to support your conclusion and your arguments, and how to share that with other students or other people. And then number 7 is just familiarizing the student with variables and controls, things that would be in experiments. Again, this is vocabulary a student would need to know as they're setting these things up and looking at the outcomes and what could happen and what did happen. And then number 9 here is just to expand the vocabulary. So of course, when they know the vocabulary, they can understand the readings better. They understand how experiments work. And again, it's just hitting home what's important in those science areas as far as vocabulary. And then the last one is connecting again to real life scenarios, looking at health topics, looking at environmental issues maybe a student's involved in, or tech advances. Talk about Chat GPT and all those fun things that are happening. And just talk about it in terms of science, and that will really assist your students.
Real quick test before you move to social studies. I know we're closing in on the time. Someone asked in the chat if the students can use physical formula sheets for the math or only online for the official test. What are y'all's input on that?
So basically, that is a test center designation. So if a person is taking a paper-based test, of course, they will be allotted a physical formula sheet. If the student is taking a computer-based test, there is always the formula sheet on the computer that they can pull up. It is up to the test center whether they would like to provide a formula sheet to the student that is taking the computer-based test. And so that's just really something that is up to that test center. It's the same with the calculator. Some test centers will give a physical calculator when a student is taking a computer-based test. And then other test centers may decide that a student can use the calculator that's just embedded within the exam itself. So those two things are really test center based.
Thank you. Do they need to reach out to you to let you know if they decide to utilize a physical formula sheet?
No,
Or okay, perfect.
Nope, absolutely not. That is definitely up to them. I'm going to do a really quick perusal of social studies. Here we go. History, civics, economics, and geography. 70 minutes and 60 questions. History, you're looking at cartoons, letters, documents, things that maybe interconnect the past with the present and the future and things that can happen. Looking in the eras of US and world history, who has shaped them? Maybe talk about the different ages throughout history. When we get down to civics and government, we're looking at the democratic process. What are rights and responsibilities? What do political party members do? And what are public meetings? All these different things that really talk about being a citizen in our democratic society. And then recognizing how the government works. What is the structure? Who has the power? What are the constitutional principles? And then the third is just understanding what's a republic, what's a democracy, what are the two parties, things like that. What is communism? What are all the different things that can be out in the world that they may not be really familiar with? And then the last two are economics and geography. So just understanding like supply and demand, understanding what economics really is. So what's the labor market? What is trade back and forth? What is our monetary policy? Understanding consumer economics. So savings, these are really good ones to hit. Savings, rates, credit, all those different things. And then with geography, we're looking at, again, terminology, using concepts to talk about borders and regions and migration and different things with cultures blending together. And then, of course, there are maps. So learning to look at maps, again, that's going to be part of your data set. And then with your depth of knowledge, you can kind of read through here, but I'm going to hit the top 10 to end it. And then that's just practicing and reading various types of materials, being able to extract information. Again, this pairs great with reading, going back and forth. One day you're reading a science text, one day you're reading a social studies text, one day you're doing current events, different things to talk about. Developing critical thinking, so cause and effect, using research skills, reading maps, things like that, maybe they need to learn to read a bus route. That's a great start on map reading. Understanding government systems, talking about voting, talking about economic trends and where the US is. Being able to think about historical events and how they have shaped the lives of those that live in the US and those that live outside. And then also looking at cultures and how different societies work and how they interact with each other. Also developing skills that talk about historical evidence. And then the last is just articulating thoughts and opinions in a well thought out, well organized manner. So that's really important when you're doing discussions in class, whether it's in any of these these sub tests categories, is just being able to present yourself in a very well organized and well mannered way. So those are my top 10. We have a couple seconds for questions. Otherwise, I will give this presentation to Brandy. Most of you have heard me talk about accommodations, but it will be on there and you have my email. You can call me, text me, contact me at any time. And I have done several presentations throughout Minnesota, small, for possibly your program or even just a few new teachers. So absolutely contact me if you need me for any reason whatsoever.
Thank you, Tess. Do we have any questions by chance last minute? Susan asked if we could do practice test ourselves. So there are two options. If you go through HiSET's link, there is a practice test and it is free. But the official practice test you have to get through Essential Education. They have an account that you create. I've already created an email on how to create that account and utilize vouchers because we do have vouchers. So if you want to shoot me an email, I can send that specific how-to email and it will give you step-by-steps on how to create that account, Susan, for yourself, staff, or even students, and put in those vouchers. And that will be the official practice tests, which are $2 vouchers. Remember that. Perfect. I see that you responded to me. I also last minute wanted to remind people that do the OPT vouchers expire? No, they do not. That is one thing that I do know is they do not expire, which is nice. So if you have some, if you need some, I still have a couple, about 100-ish left from when we originally bought 500. So if you're wanting some for students, just give me an email and I can send those to you guys. Mobile testing centers, if this is something that you are interested in doing, we talked about this during the Coffee Talk series. The basic thing is reaching out to a parent, and I'm using quotes here, a parent testing center. So if you feel like maybe you want to kind of dip your toes by having a mobile test site, then we can utilize some of our already existing testing centers. I know Harmony, Scott Helen said that he would be up for anyone that wanted to use his physical site as a parent site. So reach out to me, I can get you connected and we can kind of dip some toes into the mobile testing options, which also gives you the ability for paper testing if you meet one of those accommodations or needs as specified otherwise. Okay?
That's wonderful. Yeah, it's great to do some of those pilots out there to see, how they work and how you can best support your students. So thanks for doing that.